This is Molly Gallagher, Radnor Township Public Information Officer. We are very happy to partner with the League of Women Voters and Radnor Conservancy to discuss the home modification process in Radnor Township. Joining us today is Kevin Kachansky, Director of Community Development, Roberta Winters, past President of the League of Women Voters, and Gretchen Grobel, Executive Director of Radnor Conservancy. Thank you all for being here today. And Kevin, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Absolutely.
So first, before residents make any changes to their property, what steps do they need to take with the township?
We always encourage our residents to come in and either come in or call or email us, letting us know what the project is. In most cases, there will be some level of permit approval that will be required, whether it's through the Community Development Department or the Engineering Department. And we want to make sure that they start off on the right foot with the appropriate approvals versus trying to catch up with things after the fact.
Okay, perfect. So would that happen when they have the idea or concept for a project, or as they're hiring contractors and putting plans in?
It happens in various stages. We like to get involved as early as possible to try to flush out any issues, which then can steer the project in a different manner which the resident or the business owner had initially intended. Sometimes that's to maybe make the project a little bit better, or sometimes it needs to scale back in order to be compliant with the codes.
Okay.
What happens if someone has a project to do and it doesn't meet the zoning requirements? Do they have any options?
From a zoning ordinance standpoint, they do. They can file for a variance from the zoning hearing board. That's a timely and expensive process. For residential, it could be at least $550 for the application fee. You have to get a site plan. While an attorney isn't required, we do recommend it if a resident isn't comfortable arguing in front of the zoning hearing board. It is a quasi-judicial body, so there are some legal ramifications to that. That's why I like to get involved early on, because then I can, put on the designer's hat and see if we can, meet the intent of the resident, and maybe not necessarily what they first envisioned for the project to be. And been fairly successful in kind of working through some of the gray areas of the code to get the residents what they need and what meets their objectives for their project.
Well, it seems like that residents need to have somebody on board at the beginning who knows what's happening so they can help them. So do contractors usually have a voice? I mean, what do you need in looking for a contractor?
Well, contractors are very helpful, but residents don't necessarily need to rely on their contractors or their design professionals. Whether it's myself or through the engineering department, we have a fair understanding the limitations coming out on the property, just from a visual. Obviously, it's not binding. The devils are in the details, and that's why we need site plans and a level of specificity on those to really determine compliance. But it's starting that conversation. Okay, what do you want to do? Where is there floodplain? Are there hard restrictions? Are there impervious coverage limitations? So getting those conversations early can help. What contractors are absolutely critical in that role, but not necessarily needed.
Okay, so that's good. And so maybe also if I were looking for contractors, do they have to be insured? Are they registered in such a way? Can I come to the township? Do you have lists of people, or do we go out on our own?
You do kind of have to go out on your own. We can tell you if the contractor is registered. They do need to carry minimum insurances, and they do need to be licensed and registered with the township. There's also a home contractor registration through the state, but we still then require the local registration here for that. But ask neighbors, ask family members as to their experiences. If you know somebody that had a project done, talk and definitely do shopping. Get multiple quotes just to make sure that what you think is a good deal is a good deal. Sometimes it is too good to be true.
Well, I don't need to see a contractor before I come to you to see if it's even possible. So that's good to know, so I didn't have to spend any money.
You don't have to spend any money. Our time is free. I love getting out of the office and meeting with our residents and getting our boots on the ground, so to speak. To see how we can work within the codes and limits of the site, and sometimes we bring a fresh perspective that even when a design professional, residents tend to kind of fall in love with the very first thing that their design professional, and that may not meet code because our codes are unique in Radnor. So when I can come out and look at it from a different perspective and give them different alternatives that their design professional wasn't familiar with the nuances of the code. Can open up some eyes and give them some different options and sometimes make the project better.
So, Kevin, often we hear a lot of different design terms thrown around, and I was just wondering if you can clarify the difference between remodeling, renovating, repairing, rebuilding, and then new construction?
Sure. Those terms mean different things to different people and are defined differently officially depending on what you're doing and what code book you're looking at. So, a remodel or a renovation from a zoning standpoint could be different in the building side, and sometimes, we handle both of those in community development, but there's a divergence there between what zoning could mean and what the building codes could mean. Similarly, in engineering, there's a divergence as to what we look at from impervious coverage versus what engineering looks at. So the devils are in the details and the specifics of the code that you're trying to accomplish. So they all have different meanings depending on what the scenario is that we're trying to apply that term to. But big picture, a repair is something that, say, your heater breaks and you need to get a new heater, or you have a wintertime and your pipeline freezes and bursts. That could be a repair where you're just trying to fix a single item. Renovation could be a whole house renovation, or could be renovating a room. New construction sometimes gets lumped in with renovation if it could be a changing interior partitions of a house plus adding on an addition. Or some people think of new construction as you're tearing down a house completely and starting from foundation all the way up. So there's different meanings to all of those, but they all require permits to some degree. In an emergency situation, an emergency repair, we're not interested in getting the application in, reviewing it, and then while your basement's flooding, get that repair done, and then follow up with us. The code says a day or two to follow up with us with the paperwork. We understand that there's exigent circumstances that need to be handled at the time, which is fine, but then we catch up with the paperwork later.
So if someone had a question about would a permit be required, would they just contact you at the township and ask?
Yes, in most cases, whether it's myself or the community development department, anybody that answers the phone, in most cases, permits are going to be required for any kind of remodeling, wallpaper, carpets, kitchen cabinets. That doesn't involve changing the location of a sink, painting. None of that requires permits, but when you start moving plumbing fixtures, electrical outlets, lighting, interior walls, that all requires permits.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Well, I noticed during the pandemic, there seemed to be a lot of swimming pools being built in Radnor Township. What kinds of permits are needed if you're trying to build a residential swimming pool?
Pools, absolutely. Accessory structures. People found that being at home, all the different renovations. So there's a variety of permits that are required for that. We look at it from a zoning standpoint for setbacks from the property line. Each district has different requirements for the setbacks where they can be located on the site. It starts to trigger stormwater management and engineering with the grading permit applications. But then you get into the building construction. So you start with the zoning and the grading, and then you finish with the building. So you can start with me, jump over to engineering, and then you're right back with me with the building permits. We look at the bonding of it to make sure electrically it's fine, the plumbing of it to make sure that the plumbing is all appropriate. There's sometimes these pools have automatic fillers that are tapped into the domestic supply. We can't let the pool water contaminate the domestic supply, so there's backwater prevention valves on there. So we look at all of that, the structural integrity of the pool and then the shell, if it's concrete or if it's a drop-in liner. We review all of that from the permit standpoint. Fencing is then a key. Another thing, make sure that it is surrounded by a fence. It's attached to the house, window alarms, door alarms. So there's a variety of things that are special to, there's an individual code book dedicated just to pools and spas. So, that they've pulled that out of the residential code, and there's a separate code book just for that because of all the specific requirements.
So it's not simple.
Nothing is simple. Nothing is simple.
Kevin, can you give us a couple of common examples of home modifications that people have requested in Radnor Township? I don't know, something like a garage addition or a driveway expansion or something common that you come across?
Sure. Driveway expansions are primarily through engineering, although I do review it from an impervious coverage standpoint. But from a building standpoint, we see garage conversions, converting a garage to living space. That creates some potential issues that we have to take a look at, but we've seen an influx of those. In-law suites, so you want to take your detached garage and you want to do it either an in-law suite Again, there's some restrictions that, while it's allowable, there's only certain things that you can do in there. Can't have a second kitchen in there, so that couldn't be converted to a rental unit later on. Whether it's that owner or 3 owners down the line that looks at potential rental income for that. That's why there's some restrictions on there. Pools, sheds, decks, patios, finishing of a basement. We see, you name it, we've seen it come in, particularly during the pandemic.
And what happens if folks find themselves ahead of a project without pulling proper permitting? What does your job become at that point?
So that then starts to trigger the enforcement side of things. When we become aware of something, it's either the inspector driving by or a complaint from a neighbor. We will stop out and try to figure out what's going on. And oftentimes contractors say, yeah, we have permits, and the inspector will already know you don't. It's we're not here to hammer people over the head. We're here to bring people into compliance and make sure that the construction is to code. Because ultimately it's for the safety of our residents and then of the future inhabitants of the home. So ultimately our goal is to bring it into compliance. So that course of action and how we get there depends on the cooperation from not only the contractor but the homeowner. If we have somebody that's cooperative and we don't have any immediate life safety issues where we're not seeing something that's about an imminent form of collapse, we'll allow them to get caught up with the paperwork. If we see that it's something significantly, whether it's a structural issue or a safety issue, we will stop work, possibly post it as a no work, have them correct it, safe everything off, and then submit the paperwork to make sure that then it's brought into compliance with the codes.
Okay, great. So to avoid delays, interruption in work, call here first. You're a resource to the community. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
And thank you to Roberta and Gretchen
Pleasure.
for partnering with the township. It's relationships like this that make Radnor one of the best places to live, work, play, and do business on the main line. And next segment, we'll see you outside for a stormwater discussion with Steve Norsini. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.